Hi guys, this is Franklin from My Law Academy. Let me give you the blueprint for understanding personal jurisdiction, or PJ. With this framework, you'll have all the key points for analyzing a case in your casebook or a fact pattern on an exam. Here's the big picture for PJ. The plaintiff sues the defendant in a state that the defendant doesn't live in. In response, the defendant argues that the judge should kick the case out because the court does not have proper personal jurisdiction, or PJ. In Civ Pro, we call this a 12b2 motion to dismiss for lack of personal jurisdiction. When analyzing personal jurisdiction, our role is to make arguments on both sides of how it is or is not fair or reasonable that a defendant be subject to the authority or jurisdiction of an out-of-state court, the forum court. The plaintiff wants the case heard in the forum court she filed the lawsuit in. The defendant, on the other hand, would rather the case be dismissed from the forum court. The first step is to consider what's called the constitutional framework for personal jurisdiction. You see, when a plaintiff files a case in a federal court, the court is considered the forum court. If the forum court is going to have jurisdiction over the defendant that lives in a different state, then the forum court is going to have to satisfy the requirements of the federal Constitution. The specific constitutional standard that must be met is the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Due Process Clause essentially requires that the court be fair and reasonable when it reaches out to hear a case involving an out-of-state defendant. Now on to the second step. In this step, we consider what's called the statutory framework for personal jurisdiction. This is where the long-arm statute comes into play. Statutes are laws made by states. Each state has their own long-arm statute that allows its courts to reach into other states and bring out-of-state defendants into the forum state to have a dispute litigated. However, the statutory framework must still meet the requirements of the Constitution's Due Process Clause. I like to picture an imaginary arm stretching from one state and into another to grab a defendant and bring her into the plaintiff's forum court. So let's check out step 3. Once you've spotted the issue of the long-arm statute, now you have to apply what's called the International Shoe Test. The elements of the International Shoe Test are the Supreme Court's way of giving us guidance on how to argue or determine whether a long-arm statute meets the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment's standard of being fair and reasonable. The first step